Hey guys, and welcome to Betwixt the Books. Normally, this would be structured differently. We were hoping to do a review today of I Want to Die But I Want to Eat Tteokbokki by Beksehi. We are at this current moment about to do the review, not 100% sure what the structure of this video is going to look like. We're going to talk back and forth and then edit that into something, whether it seems like more of a discuss or it seems like more of a review. Unknown yet, but we're working it out with you. You're coming along for the ride with us. This is work in progress as we go. In theory, by the end of this video, you'll maybe know whether or not you want to read this. That's at least the goal of a review, right? Like, do you want to read it or do you not want to read it? We're going to hopefully at least answer that question and talk about some of the things we normally talk about in reviews, like the structure and like what we think the book is for, who it's for, what it's doing, that sort of stuff. There just might be some tangents in there along the way because we need to talk about it. We're very confused about this book, guys.
Please understand that we're doing it this way, not because we necessarily chose to, but because in our pre-discussion of how to do this, I was like, Michaela, the title has to be This is a Discuss because it can't be a review. Because if you're familiar with our typical review, format, we typically, film on our cameras and we go back and forth, and it's definitely more like concise and structured.
Yeah.
This book has no structure, and therefore this video has no structure.
Yeah. Gretchen finished it first and she messaged me and was like, I don't know how to review this book. And I was like, there's no way. Like, let me finish it. Like, I had started it. Let me finish it. And then I came and I went, I don't have answers. I don't know how to review this either. So
we've been doing this for 10 years and
yeah,
we're both confused.
We're gonna blame the book. It's the book's fault. It's not us.
I mean, partially it is. One thing to know about this book is that it is translated.
Yes.
The translator, I believe, is Anton Her.
Yes, it is
Yes.
Anton Her.
So this book was originally written and published in Korea, and it has very recently gotten a English translation.
It got super popular in Korea, according to my copy, because the South Korean rapper / boy band member RM from BTS read it and recommended it. So that's part of why it's gotten popular, both there and I think also here, probably. There's some army folks who are like, RM's pick is the best pick, and I'm like, I like BTS, but I'm not a big fan of this book. One of the things that we talked about when we were like talking about doing a regular review of this was that I was like, I don't know who to give this to. I'm a bookseller. Like, part of what I think about when I read books is who can I give this book to? Like, even if I don't like a book, there's probably a reader who will, and I could probably give it to somebody. So I was like, is this self-help? Is this a memoir? It's called a therapy memoir in the blurb, which I mean, it is. That describes this book. It's a woman talking about her experiences in therapy for dysthymia. I don't know how to pronounce that, but like mild depression, basically. I'm sad all the time. I feel listless. I don't feel happy in life. I'm not like suicidal depressed, but I'm also not happy and go lucky and what I think a person should be. She's also quite anxious as a person overall, so I would say that she maybe also has anxiety stuff going on.
So to give you kind of an idea based on just what Michaela is saying, if you have no idea what this book is, Michaela has read to you basically the blurb, like it's a therapy memoir. But once you get into it, one of the things that was really confusing, when I hear memoir, I expect prose.
Yeah.
Right. And I think in America, the self-help memoir is a very known genre, right? So you might expect some like personal stories, and in between that, some like philosophical musings or something like that about what this means, what life means, how we handle something like that. And this book takes a different approach, which is that there is some paragraphs that include some personal details and some musings, but the bulk of the big portion of the book, and I'll explain that in a minute, is literal transcripts between her and her therapist. So you get like me, blah, 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 therapist, blah, 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 and like it's like a screenplay, right? And there is no remarks throughout these transcripts if they're edited. You do hear later that the author literally audio recorded herself, so they could be verbatim, we don't know. But there's also no marker of the time between them, and we'll talk about that a little bit more, but it's all just kind of confusing on where we are in the flow of this person's therapy, and also sometimes what the point of the conversation is and what you're supposed to take out of it, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. Then comes the epilogue, which you think, okay, it's an epilogue, the book is closing, structurally that makes sense to me, but then there's a third of the book left. And after the epilogue comes more vignettes, I would say, very, very short chapters that are more musing on, like I think more typically what you might have expected to appear in the bulk of the book.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And these are really good in places. They're quite, some of them are really quite poignant and they say really good things. But if you had taken the epilogue at face value, and like, so for example, I was reading on a e-copy, right? And so had I taken the epilogue at face value, I might have just closed it because I wouldn't have had something physical in my hand to tell me that I had so much left in the book. Don't stop at the epilogue. But yeah, so that alone, I was like, I don't even know what's happening here. And I don't know what to say about that. And structurally, I have to say it really rubbed me the wrong way because I felt like I could never get my footing in terms of what does this all mean. So that I think is like the key thing to know if you want to read this book yourself. You have to check your expectations at the door because structurally it's just odd.
Yes. Yeah. And like we had talked about how like maybe this is just a difference in like culturally what we're expecting from a memoir or a self-help book. Like either of those things, if that's what this is, like either of these things, it doesn't really function like that. I think Gretchen said that she was like, oh, maybe this is just being introduced to a culture where therapy itself is kind of taboo. So it's like showing you what a therapy session looks like. Like you're like literally looking at what a therapist and a person talk about when they go to therapy and sort of how a therapist might talk to you. Like, here's a diagnosis. Here's maybe where we look at meds. Here's maybe where we like work on getting you to step outside of your boundaries, or like, you know, like all of these things that happen in actual therapy, just as like an introduction of like, here you go. And the author in the foreword said that she wanted this book to be like to give people the ability to see that they aren't alone in this like miasma thing where like you feel like you're just going through the motions and nothing is worthwhile. Even when you work really hard on stuff, it doesn't satisfy you in the way that it should. Like just so that you can see yourself in another person, which is valid. I don't even know that it did that because both Gretchen and I talked about how much we disliked the author. I think
one of the things about therapy is that you can say things to your therapist that maybe they don't make you you don't make you a great person, right? Like you can say, because I think we all have those thoughts where it's just like you're a little bit too jealous or you want to be mean to someone, you know, and maybe you don't even mean it at the time, but therapy is a really important time to articulate some of those feelings that, you know, maybe you wouldn't say in general conversation, right? And there's a reason that therapy is private. I did feel like this particular author had a lot of behaviors that were just like wow, okay. But also this is how she's portraying them to her therapist. And then when you get some other details about her life, you're just like, is it really that bad? And because we had no grounding in between the therapy sessions, right? We had no look at what her daily life was like. We had no look at, it was really hard to tell in those conversations how much of that, what that was grounded in, and what,
Yeah.
maybe some of her more, you know, more heightened behaviors looked like to her normal. Like you had no baseline.
Yeah.
And so it was really hard to try to figure out what this was doing, because like Michaela said, like my question just immediately was why? Like
Yeah.
why this book? Like what is it trying to do?
Yeah.
And I think Michaela had said something important before we started, which was that we're not sure what progress she makes.
I the thing that works with the structure that we would expect, which is if you're going to have the transcript, that's fine. Here's my therapy session. Usually you're then going to have like some sort of discussion about that and how that related to her life. So you would see how she tried to implement the thing the therapist asked her to do in her life. You would maybe get an anecdote about that, or talking about like, oh, like this compared to this thing earlier. Maybe even like a before and after. Like, here's before I had this conversation with my therapist. Here's the therapy conversation. Here's a similar situation afterwards where I use these tools. Like, it doesn't show you like how to use the therapy to better yourself.
Well, and one of the things about it not having like closure is also because, so in Korea there are 2 books.
Oh, okay.
And I believe she mentions that in her author's note.
Yes.
But in America, I believe only the first one has been translated.
Okay.
Because the other thing about this too is that, like I mentioned earlier, there's no information about time in between these sessions. Except for there's like one interregnum where she says, because of several family events, I couldn't go back to therapy for another 2 weeks. And that was the one moment where I was like, oh, these are all therapy sessions in sequence. But then she talks in the end about stopping therapy. And then in her author's note, she says that she was under the care of a therapist for 10 years. And there is very obviously not 10 years of care here. So that's part of the problem. On the one hand, I'm wondering if like the closure that we're looking for is in the second book. What's in the second book? Because this book also did try to give itself closure.
Yeah.
I'm just so confused.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have an answer. The like vignettes, like you said at the end, are definitely trying to like comment on the themes that were brought up in the therapy sessions earlier. Like I think that's meant to be our closure, is like, here's an essay on the like thing where I'm like outwardly judgmental and mean to others. Here's a thing on my body image issues. Here's a thing on like so on and so forth. All of these little things that were brought up. And some of them were very well written, like pretty to read, which was not the case for the transcripts. The transcripts were like very direct and like almost informal to me. Like it didn't feel like a casual conversation, which is how I prefer my therapy to be. Like, it was very straightforward. Like, I'm having this problem. How do you feel about that? I feel this way about it. What about in this situation?
I definitely felt like the conversations were very robotic in a certain sense, but I was also sure, I mean, they're translated.
Yes, yeah.
Right. I assume also edited, because no 2 people will ever never say
Yes.
like,
yeah.
But also, I mean, it could very well be that, again, this is not an American context, and that this is a very formal conversation. And that like this is the way that it works. I mean, she certainly cries quite a bit during therapy. But yeah, I just kind of took that as a nature of like editing and translation.
But then like, again, that would be the case if the whole book felt that way, but the essay parts did not feel that way to me. Like, there was some like interesting turns of phrase there. Like, it was definitely more flowery when it came to some of those essays. One of them, the one that's on page 189 of mine, that's called Fiction, it's literally one paragraph, and I was like, this is almost like internet poetry level. the only real talent I have is putting others down. Like a lamp in the dark night, I can see other people's weaknesses. Like it's like that,
Yeah.
you know, like that's not the same language that's being used in the transcripts. I did like that there, this is a tangent. I did like that there was an essay from the therapist where the therapist was like, yeah, she sent this to me so I could see it. And like, I kind of feel bad that I didn't do a super great job with my care. Like I would do things differently now having looked at those, but like, yeah, it was an imperfect person with an imperfect person having a conversation.
But can we also talk about how the author brought her recording device and the therapist was like, why are you recording these? And she was like, well, because I sometimes forget what we talked about, which I totally understand. That happens to me too in therapy, where it's like,
Yes.
it's a whole hour, right? And you're like, oh, the therapist said that one really important thing like 45 minutes ago and I don't remember it.
It's also very high emotion, which can make you have more
Yeah.
memory issues anyway.
But then from what it sounds like, she just told her therapist all of a sudden that she was making a book out of it, like
Oh,
without the
by the way,
therapist's
I'm also
consent.
yes, yes. Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
what?
Like
Because that would have
a
been
lot of
another.
what's here is what the psychiatrist said. Like the psychiatrist has like way larger sections of communication than she does a lot of the time. So like half this book is the therapist.
Well, and that's why I was thinking another why for this book. Like,
Yes.
why is this book like that? Is that it's a meta commentary not on only on getting therapy, but giving therapy.
Yeah.
Right. And so there would have been something to me in this if they had a closer collaboration on this book where they were presenting not only like, you know, both sides of the story. And that's why when I saw the table of contents and I saw a note from the therapist, I was like, oh, maybe this was a closer collaboration than I think it was. Obviously, there's only one author on it, but and then the therapist was like, yeah, I didn't know this was happening. And I really didn't get my consent asked for until it was too late.
Yeah. Which rude, but also like what can you do? Maybe it made them money because she was like, yeah, this is the therapist I use if you want to go to them and you liked their therapy in this book. Maybe, I don't know. Publicity. They're never named, so maybe not.
No, but that's what I mean. It was just like when I got to that part and realized that, I was like, that was another why for me removed.
It also there was a point in the transcripts where she talked about how she was writing a book and that she was like already partially through it. And I'm like, is it this one? Because you've done very little writing. Like you've transcribed some therapy sessions and maybe done an introduction thing to it sometimes. And usually those were like quite short and not even, they didn't always even relate to what the conversation was sometimes. Like, do you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Like, usually what I would do is be like, okay, so in this chapter, we're going to talk about my body image issues. And I'm going to have a thing where I talk about my body image issues, like where I'm coming from. And then here are some conversations. I would even take different therapy days of like, here's one I had at the beginning, and here's one in the middle, and here's one toward the end where we're having different conversations. If you communicate that to us, like, that makes more sense than having a vignette about body image issues and then having a conversation where what she largely talks about is her rejection sensitivity at her job. Like, you know?
And that's what I mean also about like no grounding.
Yeah.
Like she talks very briefly about like, you know, the judgment of her family, particularly her older sister. And then the therapist tries to bring up her older sister and she's like, nah. Which is definitely a thing that you do in therapy, right? Like sometimes when you're just like that conversation gets too close, you're like, no, I'm gonna like divert, right?
Yeah.
But then it's just like, okay, so when you have this perfect opportunity here in the prose part to dig into that, and we don't. I mean, she does. So if you're made it this far in this video, but also like if you're gonna read this, like there is definitely like significant discussion of body image issues. She also grew up in an physically abusive household, which was just kind of brought up
and then dropped,
never talked about again.
Yeah.
And I was like, but again, but that's the thing of like, okay, so did that get talked about in therapy sessions that were not in the book?
Probably.
Right?
Yeah.
Right. But there's no sense of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's hard to say. And so for me, reading them in what I thought was chronological order, I was like, okay, I do not have a therapy degree, But at the same time, like if someone brought up, all right, I was brought up in an abusive household, like I would dig into that.
It's like maybe part of the reason why you're not happy. It's
yeah.
There might be some lingering problems from this childhood that was traumatic.
Yeah, so the way that I took that was that the therapist heard that and she was like, okay, I don't care about that. We're just never gonna talk about it.
Ignore it. I want to talk about how you feel like you drink too much.
Just so, yeah.
Yeah. I definitely think that this could be harmful to someone with an active body image issue thing, because there's a lot of negative self-talk that I think could trigger somebody. So yeah, that's definitely something worthwhile to think about before picking this up.
It was very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
As someone who has done harm to their body, struggling with body image issues.
Yeah.
I did not enjoy that.
Yeah. Which I don't think was really talked about in the pitch of this at all, did it? It was mostly just talking about her being mildly depressed.
Yes, it was. I understood it as a book about depression.
Yeah.
And granted, depression has many forms.
Yes.
It has many effects. And body image issues are a common one. But at the same time, like, I feel like if you're going, maybe this is very American, but I feel like if you're going to bring up some of these topics, you have to be mindful to alert readers to their presence. Especially when they're talked about in this detail and in this way.
Yeah. We did talk about off camera how we think that possibly part of that is a cultural thing, where like weight and changes in weight is not like a general like discussion topic between strangers or even very common. It might come from like a close family member, but it's not really something that happens all the time. Whereas like she seems to constantly be thinking about that, like any old person on the street is going to be thinking about her weight at any time. And like, again, I don't know if this is a cultural thing, if that's a conversation that just happens a lot more often in Korea, which it totally could be. And that's why it's such a big part. And also why it's maybe not thought of as something to like ring bells. Because if it's a common thing, then like maybe the people who the target audience of this would be used to those conversations. Whereas here in America, that's like kind of a taboo topic. And then also we know it to be triggering, to be like, don't give your like negative self-talk to other people so they can have other things to be insecure about.
Yeah. And I mean, it makes sense in, what you said, from the forward, which is, the author was clearly just trying to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, they have to be aware that this book does not paint a flattering picture of them as a person, but that was less important than just being truly raw and honest. And like, I, as a person who has a successful career and has, a partner, and so clearly maybe from the outside looks like my stuff is together, like this is really how I feel on the inside. And that is why I have a hard time, like I still haven't rated this book on Storygraph. I don't know what to do with it because I admire the mission. I struggle with the execution.
Yeah. And I think that like it is definitely a book that I think like someone who maybe thinks similar to her will get comfort from being like, okay, I'm not the only one. My brain processes are very different than hers. And so it didn't do very much for me at all, other than like make me worried about what other people think. It made me concerned for some others out in the world.
I had like this glass pane that kept me from fully engaging with the issues under discussion because I was so confused by the book.
Yeah.
And so for me, I feel like there's probably some stuff that I maybe even missed because my brain was just unable structurally to comprehend the point.
Yeah.
And so I just kept kind of reading, I think a little bit quickly. being like, okay, this will make sense after a couple of chapters. This will make sense after, okay, I'm at the epilogue. This will make it make sense. And it just never did. And then I thought the book was over. And so I started kind of speed reading the vignettes at the end before I really registered that they were quite different.
Yes.
Because I thought the book was over.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, I didn't know what these were.
Yeah.
So my brain just had a full on like fritz. It was so lost.
Which is fair. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know where to rate this, which is another reason why we couldn't do a traditional review of this, because normally we were like, okay, 3 stars. This is my overall opinion of it. And like our overall opinion is, I don't know how many stars to give it. I'm not a big fan of it structurally or even the content. Like I don't feel like I got anything out of it. And then I don't know who to give this to, even if it did make sense. Like I don't have anybody to hand this to and be like, you know what, it wasn't for me, but it could be for you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's hard to do a review, and that's how you come out at the end. Is it interesting? Maybe. Like it might be worth reading to like see what therapy looks like in other countries, sort of. I don't know. Is it helpful if like somebody has no idea what therapy is, has literally no idea what therapy is? I could hand this to them maybe and be like, this is what a conversation could look like. But even then, I talked about how it felt like parts of the conversations were cut out, because sometimes I would be reading along and I'm like, how is that the response to the thing that was just said? Like, it makes no sense to me. Like, it feels like there was other things that were talked about and we've transitioned to a new topic, but I have no, like, we talked about this for another couple of minutes, or like redacted, like, you know, like I don't have anything to communicate that this was edited that way. Still,
as someone currently editing transcripts for publication, what in the sweet world?
Yeah. We don't have timestamps. We don't know like anything. Like this was November 3rd, 2017, and this was, you know.
And I will say also, to who to give this to, I feel like there is a strong dependence throughout this narrative on medication.
Mm.
And I am not against medication. I am not saying that that is a problem, but there also could be someone who gets a hold of this and is like, okay, I require medication, because she ends up on a couple of different ones. For certain times I wouldn't expect medication.
I think one of them even was an ADHD med, and I was like, are we diagnosing her with ADHD?
Yeah, and then there was also like, you know, she talks about her alcohol impulse control, and she's like, okay, I can give you medication to like, but she's not an alcoholic. And so like I'm not,
yeah.
Again, I do not want to say bad things about anyone in their life who needs medication. Some people, you know, you do what works for you. I just had feelings about the ease of which it was like, okay, all of these issues that you're bringing to me, I'm just going to give you a different
pill to help with. Yeah.
And I just, you know, I did feel a little bit uncomfortable with that.
Yeah. It wasn't like, okay, you feel like you drink alcohol too much. Why are you drinking alcohol? Oh, is it alone, or is it with your coworkers? Like, do you go out for drinks with them because you feel like you are obligated to be social? Like there's other reasons why people might be drinking more than they want to than alcoholism, and you know.
But also,
or like, I'm sad and it's the only way I can feel happy, or you know, like there's all sorts of other reasons. Like let's maybe work on some of those things.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, yeah, I could talk about Korea has a huge drinking culture, so there is a chance that part of the reason that she's drinking so much is a social thing. Korea drinks like more alcohol per volume than like the next 3 countries combined, I think is said, as a country. Like they just drink a lot of alcohol there because it's social. Like anytime you're eating food, you're drinking alcohol, and they eat socially. Like 10 years ago, you couldn't eat in a restaurant if you went by yourself. Like you had to be a party of 2 or more. So like, if you think about that as a cultural thing, interesting stuff. But yeah.
But I mean, it makes the immediate suggestion of
a
medication just even
weirder.
Yeah. Like, it's just, without question, like, no questions asked, just like, okay.
Here you go. Yeah, I don't know. Not a psychiatrist, so I don't know what prompts somebody to give a medication. We aren't therapists. We don't know.
But also, yeah, to your point though, we also don't know if there was conversation that got cut there.
Yeah. Right? Or if it was like an ongoing thing from like many weeks and now we're at this point and this is just the part we're seeing.
Yeah. So it just, we can critique this, but we also have no sense of time and space.
No.
Yeah. Which may make more sense.
Yeah.
But I do think the way that it's cut together like this without that sense, but would potentially give someone a false impression of how that might be treated. Yeah. Or how it needs to be treated in that way.
Yeah. I think that's valid. Anyway, we picked it up for a couple of reasons. It's translated and it fulfills the challenge of reading a translated book. We wanted to read a book by an Asian author during AAPI month, which even though this video is going up in Pride Month, we did read the book mostly in last month, which was Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Yeah, it fulfilled those. We don't do nonfiction very often, so it was nice to do like a nonfiction pick just to break up the monotony.
Well, I do a lot of nonfiction, so I was excited. Well, no, but that was one of the reasons that we thought this would work, was that it fits my love of nonfiction and it's your love of translated fiction, and we thought it would be a really good marriage of things we both really like. And it turned out to be something that just deeply confused the both of us.
Yeah, but it was short, and we can say that we read it.
Yay, yeah. I mean, we ticked it off on our buddy reading challenge, so hurrah!
Nailed it.
Did it.
I don't know that we've done a proper review of this. I mean, I know that I'm pretty sure this was really weird and strange, and I'm sure that we've edited some of this stuff out or to make more sense or perhaps for flow. But if you've watched the whole video, I hope that it was at least somewhat interesting and that maybe you get an idea of whether or not you want to pick up this book, whether it's to see what the hell we're talking about, or if you think that it might actually be helpful for you, go ahead, give it a shot. I'm never going to say no to somebody trying anything. And I like seeing more translated works of all kinds. Like, I don't see a lot of translated nonfiction, I feel like. That's something of like this level. Like, that's not very common. It's a lot of fiction, I feel like, that gets translated. So it was nice to see that as an option. So yeah, that's what we've got.
So yeah, like Michaela said, if you made it all the way here, thank you so much. Even though this was kind of odd, like we've been talking about lately, discussing with each other and with other people is really just a thing that we really enjoy doing. So I'm not sad that we didn't, film it back and forth, because we got to just discuss this book. And it might be a reason you want to read it, to like just discuss with us like what is going on here, what are your thoughts. So if you do read it, please do come back and leave something in the comments. We'd love to continue talking about this book with other people. We are hopefully going to be keeping the discussions going. Last month we debuted a reading roundtable feature where we literally just had us and a couple of friends talking about what we were reading lately, and we weren't sure how that first one was going to go, but it went beautifully. And we are hoping to replicate that with some different friends again this month. And so hopefully you'll come back for that. We did just have our 10-year anniversary special come up, which was incredible. We did a full hour-long book club discussion of The Lost Things by John Connolly. That was amazing. So I'm just proud of us for producing joint content, so you're not just seeing my face talk about romance novels all the damn time. And hopefully you're enjoying them and you'll come back for more. So thank you guys so much, and happy Pride Month. Bye.